Singapore's Foreign Minister K Shanmugam has welcomed comments by his Indonesian counterpart made yesterday on the row over the naming of an Indonesian warship. Mr. Shanmugam says the remarks were helpful and constructive. Dr. Marty Natalegawa had said no will or malice was intended in naming the ship after 2 Marines who bombed a building in Singapore in 1965. 3 civilians died in that attack. Speaking to Singapore media today, Mr. Shanmugam said it's important for Singapore to know Indonesia is not honouring the 2 Marines for killing Singaporeans.
It was last week that we found out that a warship was going to be named after the 2 Marines, and it was going to be called Usman Harun. It is, of course, as many people in Indonesia, as well as some other commentators have pointed out, it is, of course, Indonesia's sovereign right to name the warship as it chooses, after whoever it chooses. But that really is not the total answer, nor is it the end of the matter. Sovereign decisions can, of course, have an impact on other countries, and in this case, Singapore. Why do I say it? You know, when you name a warship like this, there is a range of interpretations possible. At the most benign, it could mean that Indonesia did not take into account our Singaporean sensitivity, how Singaporeans would interpret the naming, given what the Marines actually did in Singapore. At the other end of the range, much less benign, is that Indonesia glorifies the actions in Singapore rather than simply treating them as heroes who did or who carried out their orders, right? The range of interpretations. This is therefore an area where Indonesia's sovereign right to name a warship intersects with a part of our mutual history and Singaporean and Indonesian mutual decision to put that history behind us. And there has to be sensitivity on the part of both countries to make sure that it is behind us and not reopen it. That is why we asked Indonesia to reconsider the naming of the warship. It is one thing to name a building in Indonesia or bury them in the hero cemetery. It is quite another to name a warship. The signal is very different because the ship sails the 7 seas, carrying that message to every land that the ship goes to as it carries that nation's flag. What is that message? So it would have been difficult for us to proceed as business as usual, as if nothing had happened. As a result, TNI chiefs and officers did not attend the air show. So what next? We have said what we think should be done. Foreign Minister Marty Natalegawa made some very helpful comments yesterday. He has made clear that there was no ill will or malice intended. That is very constructive. We welcome his comments. In that context, it is quite important for us to know that the Marines are not being honored for killing Singaporeans. And it is also important for us that it is understood and acknowledged that the naming of the ship impacts on us and impacts on our sensitivities.
Mr. Shanmugam also said explicitly that there is nothing subjective about the actions of the 2 Indonesian Marines in 1965. He said the bombing of McDonald House was illegal under international law.
The Marines used civilian disguise. They planted a bomb at McDonald House. It was targeted at civilians, killed and injured civilians. It was part of a campaign of terror. And, you know, it was totally contrary to the laws of war. I saw some opinions in the media that it depends on which shade of history. There is nothing subjective about Geneva Conventions. What happened was illegal under international law, period. If it happens now, if people plant bombs to kill civilians, historians won't be debating on how to characterize it. There are no shades of gray here. It was a part of a campaign of terror, attacks on schools, other civilian institutions. Bombs were planted across the island. These 2 men were tried in the courts. They committed a serious crime. People died. One of the ladies who died had 6 children. All were orphaned immediately. The case went up to the Privy Council in London. They were found guilty. They were hung in 1968. What did the event mean at that time between the two countries, Singapore and Indonesia. By the time the two men were tried and before they were hung, President Sukarno had lost power, confrontation had stopped, President Suharto was in power. We were seeking to forge a new relationship with Indonesia. Indonesia asked for these two men, as well as others, to be released. We released 45. Not many people appreciate. We released 45, including two men who had actually been sentenced to death because they had a bomb which exploded, but no one died. We took into account the relationship, what we were trying to do, and so we pardoned those two, and we released 45 men. And the fact that no one had died in that particular explosion. The execution took place 3 years after the bombing and the killings. How could we have answered to the victims and their families and to Singaporeans if we had set these two men free? The other two who were set free had not killed anyone.
Mr. Shanmugam also described the decision not to pardon the two Indonesian Marines as a defining moment in Singapore's foreign policy.
The not pardoning Usman and Harun was actually a defining moment for Singapore in terms of our foreign policy. If we had agreed to release them, then that would have set the precedent for our relationship with all bigger countries. What is that precedent? That we will do, or we should do, what a bigger country asks us to do, even when we have been grievously hurt. And that would be a very different concept of sovereignty. And it's definitional that almost every country that deals with us would be bigger than us. So we decided that's not good for us. And the men were hung. It was not an easy decision because British forces were withdrawing in 2 years. We are talking about 1968. Almost non-existent defense capability. But Mr. Lee Kuan Yew stood firm. It was our sovereign decision. The Indonesian public was very upset. Our embassy in Jakarta was sacked. Again, I'm not sure how many people know that. It was sacked. But within a few years, there was some closure. Both countries put aside the events of confrontation. Our relationship improved. We took active efforts, President Suharto and Mr. Lee Kuan Yew. And today, if you look at the relationship, it is excellent. It's mutually beneficial. We were the second largest investor in Indonesia last year, and we have regular consultations. In fact, last week I was in Indonesia. We keep taking steps to strengthen our relationship, keep the momentum, because Indonesia and Singapore have to live together, and Indonesia has really provided the stability that has allowed the entire region to prosper.